All right, today we're going to continue with our paper writing process, and today what we're going to do is check for unity. So we should be at a point in our paper now where you've got the body pretty much created, and you've got an introduction drafted. You should know what your individual paragraphs are doing, all four of them. And you should have written, as you guys will tonight in this class, you should have written some form of a conclusion. We will come back around to conclusions in more depth later, but this is a great place to start. I want to review the writing process for you really quickly, just to remind you of what we've done so far, and make sure that you understand not only what we've done, but so that you can begin to think about, well, what step of the process am I stuck at? Where do I get lost? What thing do I need to know better in order to improve? So to start the writing process, you should have chosen a general topic or a question to address. Remember that we're not starting with thesis here. We are starting with a question or a general topic. So if you wanted to talk about flowers, for example, in the Time Machine by H.G. Wells, that's a general topic. Or you could frame that in terms of a question. What is the actual significance of the flowers that Weena gives to the time traveler in H.G. Wells' Time Machine? Either one of those places is a great place to start, but we do not start with the thesis at this point. The next step for us is to research relentlessly. Depending on what topic you chose, you should go out there and you should always have more research than you can use. So in this case, if you know that you have 3 paragraphs, body paragraphs in this essay, and in past years you've been asked to do a minimum of 3 pieces of evidence per paragraph, although we've talked about how that is problematic. You know, when you sit down and start thinking about working on your paper, you probably should have at least 25% more quotation than you need. So I would say, 10 to 12 minimum as a place to start. I would expect there to be more than that, but that would be okay. You never want to add information to your paper at the end. You always want to whittle down what you have. You guys ever use that clay that's got that never dries out before? And you go and you make little things out of it, right? And you make a snowman, and your snowman is beautiful, and then you try to stick his arms or his ears or his hat on there, and it falls off because it's not integrated into that clay itself. That's pretty much what it feels like to me as a reader when I read your paper and you've added a quotation after the fact. Oh, I need one more quotation for my paper. It feels like it's stuck on poorly and that it's going to fall off at some point. So I always say that you start off with more research than you could possibly use and winnow it down. That way you know your paper is on the right track and you know that you have the information you need. After you've got your research, you should annotate it. Every quotation that you have should be evaluated and annotated and analyzed fully. That's how you learn what it is you want to say. That's where your thesis is going to come from, is that writing research process. So you want to make sure you do that. After you've analyzed your individual piece of evidence, you should generate a single analytical sentence for each piece of evidence. That is the seed for your topic sentences for your paragraph. And if you find that you have exactly the same sentence for 2 pieces of evidence, pretty much, then it probably makes sense that those 2 pieces of evidence be in one paragraph, right? So that's how we begin to organize our research. And you guys have done this twice now, so you should feel pretty comfortable with it. Once you've gone through all your research and picked out the things that you think are the most important, you should be able to frame your hypothesis, the answer to the topic you've chosen back in step 1. That hypothesis is a working thesis. You're not exactly sure yet what your final form might be, but it is the thing that you are going to be shooting for, that you're going to be aiming at when you write your individual paragraphs. Okay? Oh, went too far. The next portion, you should draft your body paragraphs. And this is a fundamental break with what you've learned in the past, right? That I want for you guys to draft your body paragraphs first. If you'll do this for me, then you'll always make sure that you're making sure that the paragraph is the basic unit of composition. Great papers cannot be created without great paragraphs. It only makes sense then that you deal with the most important portions of your paper first, the individual body paragraphs. Okay? After you've gotten your body paragraphs drafted, you reformulate your hypothesis and turning it into a thesis. Now you know what you want to say. It's no longer a working thesis. It is the thing that you're going to prove. And then you can begin by writing your introduction. And we've talked about the 4 main goals of an introduction. Number 1, in priority. These are in priority, not in order. It should showcase your thesis. It should identify the question or problem or dynamic that your paper seeks to address. It should identify the works or authors that you're going to be discussing. And it should engage your reader. Remember that we talked about that being the last portion of it. The best way to engage your reader is by writing a really compelling argument. So we've talked about that too, and I want to make sure that you guys understand that process. If you have any questions about the introduction process, then please go look at the other PowerPoint slide and the other video we've created, and that should walk you through it pretty well. Okay, checking a paper for unity. The great thing about writing electronically is that the material can be moved around effortlessly, right? You can make a couple of clicks, you can highlight something, you can drag and drop, you can move stuff all over the page. And that's one of the reasons we haven't specifically talked about outlines. Outlines come from an era when it was impossible to move around information. Think about it. If in the old days, you guys are lucky you didn't have to do this, you type something up. If you didn't know exactly what your outline was in the order you were going to present all your information before you started writing, you couldn't change it later, right? You had to know exactly what you want to say in the right order before you ever set typewriter key to paper, however you would say that. Okay. Similarly with a pencil, if you start off with a pen or a pencil and you want to write your paper, well, you can't draft paragraphs first. You have to start at the beginning and work your way all the way through, right? So we were limited by our writing process. The one that you have learned, as solid as it is, has been limited by the technology you've used in the past. Now that we can move stuff around and have an unlimited amount of paper and can fix things at any given time, there's a lot less need to have a rigid outline to start off with. Some people like them, and if you do, then great, knock yourself out. But most people now talk about blocking out chunks of their writing, and that's why we haven't dealt with it so far, okay? And I say modern writing is kind of like Legos. You can always revise. You can always move stuff around. It's not glued in place. All right, so the best way to check a paper for Unity is to write an abstract. Excuse me. And an abstract is a summary or statement of the contents of a book, article, or formal speech. So it's basically a real short synopsis of everything that you're going to claim in your paper, okay? And I'd ask you guys right now, and I'm going to ask you guys right now because I'm going to pause the recording, can you encapsulate your whole paper in a single paragraph? Can you, as individual writers, now that you're at this stage of your process, encapsulate your entire paper in a single paragraph? All right, welcome back. So if you can encapsulate your entire paper in a single paragraph, it's either a very, very good thing or a very, very bad thing. It's a great thing. It's a good thing when you know your argument well enough and you know your evidence well enough that you can simplify it and give it to somebody in a really small, concise way, right? You can boil it down. You have mastery over that knowledge and you can hand it off to somebody else relatively simply and relatively easily. That's when it's really great. The other thing about doing an abstract, though, if you can write an abstract at this point in the paper, when it's a bad thing is when it means your argument is overly simple, okay, that it's simplistic. That can be the other thing. So this is like the acid test. This is going to be the crucible. This is going to be the moment we start putting pressure on your writing to see if it actually works or not. And this is going to be a strategy that I've got for you guys that can help out with this. So I'm going to give you a procedure for how to write your abstract. And we're going to practice this here in a second. You're going to take your thesis and copy it into its own paragraph. Then you're going to take each one of your topic sentences and copy and paste them in the order that you currently have them in your paper below it. And then you're going to take your most important sentence from your conclusion and paste it at the end. Right? Easy. No problem. You can do that. You can identify your thesis. You can identify your topic sentences. You can figure out when you write it tonight what your most important sentence is from your conclusion, and you can paste them all together. When you've done that, you've written a paragraph. And remember that a paragraph, as the basic unit of composition, has the same basic structure and function as a whole paper does, which has the same basic content and structure as a whole chapter does, which has the same basic structure and content as a whole book does. They're all types of the same things. They're just degrees of magnitude and size, okay? If you can boil your paper down to a paragraph in this process, and it gives you a great, a solid paragraph at least, you know you're on the right track. Your argument in this little paragraph form should be compelling. It'll be poorly supported because none of your evidence has made it in there. There shouldn't be any evidence in your topic sentences. But each of your sentences should make sense in their current location. If your paragraph doesn't make sense, rewrite the paragraph so that it does. Okay? Rewrite the abstract so that it does. Then, once your abstract makes sense, those changes are exactly the same kind of changes you need to make to your paper. Go back and make sure those paragraphs do the work that they need to do. Rearrange their order. Think about whether your topic sentences need a little bit more force to them. Make sure your evidence is supporting the topic sentences that you have. And then you're going to be back in action, okay? When your abstract and your paper match up, voila, your paper is unified and on the right track. You never had to write a formal outline this way, but you still have had to manipulate the information so that it fits in the right order. Okay, so what I've got for you guys, hopefully you've had a chance now to pause the video and make sure that you've created this abstract for yourself. And we're going to check that here in a second. You're going to check it with a partner. But I've done one on my own, and what I've done is I've taken the example paper that we've had before, the Dracula paper about Lucy's sexuality, and I've used that as an example for you to work through. So I'm going to click on that for myself. And when you guys get to this PowerPoint in the future of this presentation, you'll have the ability to do this as well. You'll be able to read through the student example paper and do all of these things if you so choose, but it gives you a good place to start. So what I've done down here towards the bottom of the page is I've left the paper alone so that you could experience it and read it by yourself if you really choose to, and I know some of you have. But I've also got the abstract at the bottom. I'm going to scoot this down for a second. Try to get some of the notes out of the way. So here's the abstract that we have from that paper. I'm going to read it to you. I've done exactly the process that we just talked about to this paper, and I want you to see what you hear. Stoker uses Lucy to equate female sexuality, specifically the contrast between purity and wantonness, or the transformation from innocent to sexuality, with the monstrous. During Dracula's attack on Lucy and Whitby, sexual imagery is used to suggest that Dracula's power lies in carnal desire. In describing Lucy as a member of the undead, Dr. John Seward not only gives her a sexual connotation, but implies that it is the contrast between Lucy's new sexualized incarnation and her original sweetness that makes her particularly monstrous. This idea is further backed up by the earlier part of the passage, which introduces Lucy's figure as white with something dark at its breast. Stoker specifically chooses Lucy to embody this monstrous sexuality because of a particular trait she had during her life. The reader views the events surrounding Lucy as vampire through the filter of the men who are sexually interested in her, and this is an important consideration to take into account when analyzing their reaction to Lucy. Arthur's exorcism of Lucy in the tomb is an imitation of rape, and as such represents the forceful return of Lucy into the standard female sphere. The horror of her encounter with Dracula, the monstrosity of her undead activities, and her final exorcism are all related to her tantalizing sexuality and desirability during life. Below the first copy of the abstract, what I've done is I've gone through and I've actually annotated it. And if you click on individual places, it'll bring you to the comment I have for those individual sentences. So I thought that the first several sentences up here, the part in white, are well done. There's no problems there that I see. It's actually extraordinarily well unified, and you probably could have stuck a conclusion at the end of it and been fine. This sentence here, you'll notice that it seems to follow so closely to the first one that I think that the paragraph isn't useful. It seems like a second example to me. So you probably could have cut it, right? It doesn't seem to add anything particularly analytical. It just seems like another example. So I think that's problematic. When he goes on to talk about Stoker specifically choosing Lucy to embody the monstrous, this is important and interesting, but it seems like a background paragraph to me, right? Doesn't it seem like that probably could have been part of the introduction or something about how and why Lucy's sexuality matters in the first place, or why we consider it? So I think that if we're talking about introductions, that might be something that could go there more fruitfully. There's a weird thing that happens in this sentence. The reader views the events surrounding Lucy as vampire through the filter of men who are sexually interested in Lucy. Good. That part I'm interested in. That's great. But look what happens with the conjunction. And this is an important consideration to take into account when analyzing their reaction to Lucy. That's a throwaway second half of that sentence. That topic sentence has a weak second half. It has passive verbs, and it's going to give examples only. I think you guys can see that there. Then something interesting happens. After the fluff in the middle of the paper, the part that I say you probably could cut out or change or modify or shorten, now it gets back on track. Arthur's exorcism of Lucy in the tomb is an imitation of rape, and as such represents the forceful return of Lucy to the standard female sphere. Man, that's a strong sentence. Whether you believe it or not, that is a strong statement, and it is the culmination of the paper. This is the ultimate kind of so what of this. And I would say probably if you use that in your conclusion, you might be in a better spot. It is like the final moment when we actually see why this argument matters to somebody, why we should care about this. And then the last sentence seems to be a bit more of a throwaway too, right? I think the paper, therefore, ends up being about 3 paragraphs too long, that the information could be cut down and made a little bit tighter, and that the so what, which should be in the core of our conclusion, actually ends up being its own paragraph. So if we cut those 3 paragraphs and rewrote this, I think you'd see that this is a really, really strong paper. And I think that you would also see that it would be a better paper for having lost the extra fluff that goes in it. And hopefully this gives you guys an opportunity to see how this writing of an abstract can help you to test your paper for unity and for cohesion, if you want to call it that.